I'm not letting go. We have to pull harder. Dig in.
The bridge was seconds away from collapsing, and a man was still trapped on it. No one could reach him, no one except a horse. In a desperate move, a farmer made an unbelievable decision. He sent his horse onto the broken bridge. What happened next left everyone frozen in shock. The horse didn't just save the man. It led them to something no one was prepared to see. A hidden truth, buried right beneath their feet. And once it was revealed, nothing on that farm was ever the same again. The morning began like any other on Thomas's farm, quiet, calm, and wrapped in a thin blanket of mist. The field stretched endlessly under a pale gray sky, still heavy from the storm that had passed during the night. Rainwater clung to every surface, dripping from the barn roof, soaking into the soil, and feeding the restless river that cut through the land. That river had always been part of the farm's rhythm. Usually calm and predictable, it now roared with unusual force, its muddy waters rushing faster than Thomas had ever seen. From his porch, he could hear it, louder than the wind, louder than the birds. It made him uneasy. "Ethan!" Thomas called out, stepping into the yard. A young man in worn boots emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his shirt. Ethan had only been working on the farm for a few months, but he was hard-working and dependable. "Yeah," he replied. "I need you to check the north fence," Thomas said, pointing toward the far side of the river. After last night's storm, something might have broken loose. Ethan glanced toward the river, then back at Thomas. "You think the bridge will hold?" Thomas hesitated for a moment. The wooden bridge was old, older than both of them. It had survived years of storms, but lately it had started to show its age. Still, it was the only way across. "It'll hold," Thomas said, though his voice lacked full certainty. "Just be careful." Ethan nodded and headed off, his boots crunching softly against the damp ground. As he approached the bridge, the sound of the river grew louder, almost overwhelming. The wooden planks beneath his feet creaked with each step, echoing over the rushing water below. Halfway across, Ethan paused. Something didn't feel right. The bridge shifted slightly under his weight. He looked down and noticed a crack running along one of the support beams. His chest tightened. "Maybe I should head back," he muttered. But before he could turn around, crack! The sound split the air like thunder. The wood beneath him gave way. The bridge lurched violently, snapping apart in the middle. Ethan's foot slipped, and in an instant, he was falling. "No!" His hands shot forward, grabbing onto a loose plank just as the rest of the structure collapsed beneath him. Pieces of wood crashed into the river, swallowed instantly by the raging current. Now he hung there dangling above the roaring water, his fingers gripping tightly as his body swayed with the broken remains of the bridge. "Help!" Ethan screamed, his voice nearly lost to the river's fury. Back at the farm, Thomas froze. He heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. Without a second thought, he ran across the fields, through the mud, toward the sound of desperation. His heart pounded as the river came into view. And then he saw it. The bridge destroyed. And Ethan hanging on for his life. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. There was no safe way across. No time to think. The current below raged like it was waiting. One wrong move, and Ethan wouldn't survive. Thomas stood at the edge of the riverbank, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady his breath. The sight before him made his mind race. Ethan was still hanging on, his arms trembling, his strength fading with every passing second. The broken pieces of the bridge swayed above the rushing water, each movement threatening to pull him down. "Hold on!" Thomas shouted, though he knew Ethan could barely hear him over the roar of the river. He looked around, searching for anything that could help. A rope, a ladder, a way across. But there was nothing close enough, nothing fast enough. The current was too strong to swim. The gap was too wide to jump. Time was slipping away. Then his eyes fell on the pasture behind him. Storm stood there, watching. The horse was still, almost too still, as if he understood that something was wrong. His ears were alert, his gaze fixed on Thomas. There was a quiet strength in him, something steady in the middle of all the chaos. Thomas felt a sudden thought take shape in his mind. It was risky. It might not work. It could even make things worse. But there was no other choice. He ran toward Storm, his boots sinking into the wet ground. The horse did not move away. Instead, he stepped forward slightly, as if meeting him halfway. "I need your help," Thomas said, his voice low but urgent. Storm let out a soft breath, his eyes calm but focused. Thomas grabbed a thick rope from the fence nearby and quickly looped it around the horse's body, securing it as best as he could. His hands shook, but he forced himself to stay steady. "You have to go across," he whispered. "You have to reach him." For a brief moment, everything felt still. The wind, the noise, even Thomas's fear seemed to pause. Storm looked toward the broken bridge. Then, slowly, he began to walk. Each step toward the edge made Thomas's heart pound harder. The ground was slippery, and the river sounded even louder up close. When Storm placed his first hoof on the broken wood, the plank shifted slightly under his weight. Thomas held the rope tightly. "Easy, just easy," he murmured. Storm moved forward again. The wood creaked beneath him, but he did not stop. His movements were careful, almost measured, as if he knew exactly where to place each step. Out on the broken section, Ethan lifted his head weakly. His vision blurred, his grip slipping, but then he saw something coming toward him. A horse. For a moment, he thought he was imagining it. "Come on," Ethan whispered, his voice barely there. Storm reached him at last. The rope hung close enough to grab. Ethan let go with one hand, his body swinging as he stretched for it. His fingers brushed the rope once, then again. With a final burst of strength, he caught it. "I've got it," he shouted, though it came out as a strained cry. On the riverbank, Thomas tightened his grip and began to pull. Every inch felt like a battle. The rope went taut, and Ethan's body lifted slightly from the broken wood. "Hold on," Thomas called out again. Slowly, painfully, Ethan began to move toward safety. But just as hope started to rise, a sharp cracking sound echoed once more from the bridge. The sharp crack cut through the air like a warning. Thomas froze for a split second, his hands tightening around the rope. His eyes shot toward the bridge just as another piece of wood gave way beneath Storm's weight. "Move!" Thomas shouted, his voice filled with panic. But it was too late. The remaining section of the bridge could not hold any longer. With a loud snap, the wood broke apart completely. The structure collapsed into the raging river below, sending splinters and broken beams crashing into the water. Ethan cried out as the plank he clung to vanished beneath him. For a terrifying moment, his body dropped, leaving him hanging only by the rope tied to Storm. Thomas dug his heels into the muddy ground and pulled with everything he had. The rope strained under the sudden weight, cutting into his hands. His muscles burned, but he refused to let go. "Hold on, Ethan. Don't let go," he yelled. The current surged beneath them, pulling at Ethan's legs, trying to drag him down. Water splashed up around him as pieces of the bridge rushed past. But inch by inch, Thomas pulled him closer. With one final effort, Thomas dragged Ethan onto solid ground. The young man collapsed onto the mud, gasping for air, his body shaking from exhaustion and shock. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then Thomas looked up. Storm! The horse was gone. Panic surged through him as he rushed to the edge of the riverbank. The water churned wildly, filled with debris from the broken bridge. There was no sign of the horse. "No, no!" Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. Ethan, still struggling to breathe, pushed himself up and looked toward the river. He was right there. Then suddenly, a movement caught their attention downstream. A dark shape struggled against the current. "It's him!" Ethan shouted. Storm fought his way through the rushing water, his body battered but still strong. With great effort, he reached the muddy edge of the bank and pulled himself up, his legs shaking as he stood. Relief flooded through Thomas. He ran along the riverbank until he reached the horse, placing a hand on his neck. "You made it! You made it!" he said softly. Storm let out a tired breath, his sides rising and falling quickly. As the tension began to ease, Ethan slowly walked closer, still unsteady on his feet. That was when he noticed something unusual near the water's edge. "Thomas, look," he said, pointing. Part of the riverbank had broken open during the collapse. The force of the water had washed away layers of soil, exposing something hidden beneath. Wooden edges. Not from the bridge. Something older. Half buried in the mud were several large crates, their surfaces worn and darkened with age. They did not belong to the farm, and they were not part of the bridge. Thomas stepped closer, his expression shifting from relief to confusion. "What is this doing here?" he murmured. The river continued to rush beside them, as if nothing had happened. But something had. The rescue had uncovered more than just survival. It had revealed a secret that had been hidden for years. For a long moment, neither Thomas nor Ethan spoke. The sound of the river filled the silence, rushing past as if trying to pull their attention away from what lay exposed in the mud. But their eyes remained fixed on the crates. They were large, heavy, and clearly placed there with intention. The wood was darkened with age, edges worn smooth by time and moisture, yet the structure remained solid. These were not random pieces of debris. Someone had put them there and made sure they stayed hidden. Ethan took a cautious step forward. "Do you think they washed up from somewhere?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "No, look at them. They were buried. The river only revealed them." Storm stood nearby, still catching his breath, but his ears were turned toward the crates. He let out a low sound, uneasy, as if sensing something was not right. Thomas knelt beside the nearest crate and brushed away layers of wet soil with his hands. As more of the surface became visible, faint markings began to appear. They were not clear words, but symbols, carved deep into the wood. Strange patterns that did not belong to anything he recognized. Ethan crouched beside him. "That doesn't look like farm equipment." "No," Thomas replied quietly. "It doesn't." They exchanged a brief glance, both aware that whatever they were about to uncover might not be something simple. "Help me open it," Thomas said. The crate was sealed tight, but time had weakened its fastenings. With effort, they pried at the lid, pulling at the edges until finally, with a dull crack, it gave way. The lid shifted open. Both men leaned in. Inside were bundles wrapped in thick cloth, carefully placed and tightly packed. Thomas reached in and lifted one, his hands slow and cautious. The fabric was damp but still intact. He unwrapped it just enough to reveal what was inside. Paper. Stacks of it. Old documents, their edges yellowed and fragile, filled the crate. Some were tied together with string, others pressed flat in neat piles. There were also small objects tucked between them, items made of metal and glass, each one placed with care. Ethan picked up one of the documents, his fingers trembling slightly. "These look important." Thomas nodded, his mind racing. But why hide them under a bridge? As they continued to search, they opened another crate. This one held more wrapped bundles, but also something else. Small boxes, each sealed and marked with the same strange symbols. Ethan looked up. This wasn't done in a hurry. Whoever put this here planned it. Thomas felt a chill run through him. And they didn't want anyone to find it. The weight of that thought settled heavily between them. Ethan stood and looked around the area, his eyes scanning the riverbank, the broken remains of the bridge, the open land beyond. "How long do you think this has been here?" Thomas took a slow breath. "Years, maybe longer." Storm shifted behind them, stomping lightly against the ground. His unease had not faded. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice lower now. "What if someone comes back for it?" The question hung in the air. Thomas did not answer right away. He was thinking about the land, about how long it had been in his family, about all the years that had passed without anyone noticing what lay hidden beneath their feet. "This changes things," he finally said. Ethan nodded. "We should tell someone." Thomas agreed, but a part of him hesitated. Not out of fear, but because he understood that once they reported this, everything would change. The quiet life of the farm would not stay quiet anymore. He looked down at the crates once more. Whatever this was, it was not an accident. It was not forgotten. It had been hidden. Carefully. Deliberately. And now, because of a broken bridge and a horse that refused to turn back, it had been brought into the open. The river continued to move beside them, steady and relentless. But the truth it had uncovered stood still, waiting to be understood. By late afternoon, the quiet farmland no longer felt the same. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the stillness as word of the discovery spread. Local authorities arrived first, followed by others who seemed far more interested in what had been found beneath the riverbank. The area around the broken bridge was quickly marked off, and the crates were handled with extreme care, as if they carried more than just age. Thomas stood at a distance, watching it all unfold. Ethan sat nearby on a wooden post, wrapped in a blanket someone had brought for him. His face still showed signs of shock, but his breathing had steadied, and the color had slowly returned. Neither of them spoke much. There was a strange feeling in the air, something between relief and unease. The rescue had been a success, but it had opened the door to something far bigger than either of them had expected. Storm rested a few steps away, his body still damp from the river, a few minor injuries visible along his legs. A local caretaker had checked on him and assured Thomas that he would recover with time. The horse stood quietly, his presence steady, as if nothing about the day had changed him. But everything else had changed. One of the officials approached Thomas, holding a small notebook. "We will need to ask you a few questions," he said calmly. Thomas nodded. "Of course." As he spoke, he kept glancing toward the riverbank where the crates had been found. Some had already been opened and carefully documented. Others remained sealed, waiting their turn. The strange markings on the wood had drawn particular attention. People were taking photographs, examining every detail, speaking in low voices that carried a sense of urgency. Ethan eventually walked over, standing beside Thomas. "Did you ever hear anything about this before?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "Nothing. My family has been here for generations. If something like this was known, someone would have said something." Ethan looked back toward the site. "It feels like we uncovered something we were not meant to see." Thomas did not disagree. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, the activity near the river continued. More people arrived, each one adding to the growing sense that this was not just a simple discovery. It was a mystery, and it would not be solved quickly. Thomas placed a hand gently on Storm's neck, running his fingers through the horse's damp coat. "You did more than save a life today," he said softly. Storm remained calm, his eyes half closed, as if unaware of the weight of his actions. Ethan smiled faintly. "If it was not for him, I would not be standing here." Thomas nodded, his gaze drifting once more toward the broken bridge. Or what was left of it? A simple task had turned into a moment that would never be forgotten. A rescue that had revealed something hidden beneath years of silence. And as the river continued to flow, unchanged and endless, one thought stayed with Thomas. Some truths remain buried for a reason. But sometimes it only takes one moment to bring them back into the light. Sometimes the bravest acts don't just save lives. They uncover truths buried for years. A broken bridge, a desperate moment, and one loyal horse changed everything in ways no one could have imagined. But now I want to ask you, what would you have done in that moment? Would you risk everything to save someone, even if it meant facing the unknown? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories like this. And share this with someone who believes in courage, loyalty, and second chances. Because sometimes, heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes, they run on 4 legs.